All right. So I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Paola Manterola. I'm the Vice President of Programs, and I'd like to introduce you, my colleague Desiree Wermack. She is the Vice President of Wellness, and we both work collaboratively on the programming and wellness-related Learn and Launch webinars for the UCLA Staff Assembly, which, as a reminder, we aim to host twice a month from 12 to 1 p.m. So we are very excited to have you join us, and we appreciate your time. I would like us to get started by sharing important information about the UCLA Staff Assembly, which was founded in 1978 and supported by the Office of the Chancellor and Campus Human Resources. We are an organization for staff by staff, dedicating to promoting the interest and welfare of all staff employees. Some of the UCLA Staff Assembly purposes are to serve as an advisory body for the Chancellor and University Administration on issues of concern to staff, to foster a staff engagement in support of UCLA's mission through educational, social, and community programs, and to help promote respect and cooperation among staff and other members of the UCLA community by providing a two-way communication system. Something important to highlight is that all staff employees of UCLA are automatically members of the Staff Assembly. So you might be wondering what the benefits are. Well, it offers leadership opportunities, networking and building community, personal and professional development, a staff representation on campus and system-wide committees, and so much more. So we would like to encourage you, all campus and health system staff, to volunteer and be part of our community. We currently have an open position if you're interested for the Vice President of Strategic Communication. So again, if you're interested or have any questions regarding this role, please contact us as a staff assembly at g.ucla.edu. I am copy pasting our email here in the chat box, so you can just again copy paste that email address and reach out to us. So after having shared this with you, I would like to come back. There you go. So after having shared this with you, I would like to come back to what brings us together today, which is this webinar. And the topic is creating a more inclusive campus for transgender and non-binary Bruins webinar. So this session will contribute to a more inclusive work environment, not only for transgender and non-binary Bruins, but also for the whole UCLA community, ensuring that diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts include individuals who are transgender and non-binary. We will be informed about resources available at UCLA and the progress of internal policies and efforts for this issue. As I said before, we have two presenters today, and it's a pleasure for me to introduce Kelly Schmader, Assistant Vice Chancellor, Facilities Management. So since July 2012, Kelly Schmader has been UCLA's AVC Facilities Management, where he leads nearly 1,000 facility professionals executing building maintenance, alterations, minor construction, custodial service, ground maintenance, utilities and energy services for the campus and medical enterprise. He previously served as the Chief Facilities Executive of the Los Angeles United School District from 2010 to 2012, directing a 6,000-member staff in maintaining and operating over 800 schools while completing the district's $19.5 billion new school construction and modernization program, the largest public work program in the nation at that time. So from 1982 to 2010, Kelly served 18 years as a U.S. Navy Civil Engineer Corps officer, guiding engineering, construction, and facilities management organizations around the globe. His Navy career culminated with his assignment as commander of the 30th Naval Construction Regiment in Port Hueneme, California, where he was responsible for 1,100 CFBs deployed to the Pacific, directing 21 million of construction at 32 sites across the Pacific and Western US. He also deployed with 30 NCR to Canada in August 2009, where he commanded Task Force Forager for a 4,500 member joint services engineering task force, providing road clearance construction and water well installation across southern Afghanistan. He is a registered professional engineer and holds an MS in construction engineering from the University of Texas at Austin and a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Penn State University. He is a native Pennsylvanian from a very small rural town located 60 miles northeast of Pittsburgh. In his free time, he is an avid sport and fitness enthusiast and diehard Penn State football fan. Our second guest speaker is Andy Coffino, director of the UCLA LGBTQ Campus Resource Center. Andy Coffino has more than a decade's worth of experience supporting LGBTQA+ communities. He joined UCLA 2018 after previously serving roles at Princeton University, New York University, and on the executive board of the National Consortium of Higher Education LGBT Resource Professionals. So his work includes consulting staff, faculty, students, and senior administrators on policies related to sexual and romantic orientation, gender identity, sexual harassment, and hate crimes bias-related incidents. He leads advocacy efforts to improve university system policies and climate for LGBTQA+ students, staff, and faculty. Additionally, he oversees the center's long-term vision and strategic planning, supports the professional and student staff, and builds a strategic relationship with alumni and external community organizations. Andy also currently serves as the core member for trans inclusion for the NASPA Gender and Sexuality Knowledge Community. So thank you so much, Andy and Kelly, for taking the time to be here with us today and for all the valuable information you have to share with us. So I'll pass it on to you, Andy, to kick us off.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paula. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Kelly and I are so thrilled to be able to have this conversation with you today. So thank you so much for the generous introductions. So we're going to basically prepare this presentation, share this presentation with you about some really exciting and incredible work that's happening here on our campus at UCLA, actually throughout the UC. We're going to share with you how this came into being and how our campus continues to create greater and greater inclusion for transgender, intersex, non-binary, gender expansive, and all Bruins. And so it's a really exciting conversation. So we're going to share some of the progress that's been made, some updates that are coming out in the next year, and then leave room for questions at the end. So if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat throughout so Kelly and I can make sure that we address all the questions that you might have. And the exciting thing about this is that a lot of this work has been ongoing and will continue to be ongoing. So let's get into it. So here's the flow of what we're going to be speaking on today. So we're going to talk about the impact of this work, why this is happening right now, why these changes came into the fore, what is the impact, how important this is for our community, for all Bruins, for all of UCLA. Some of the policies we're going to be speaking about today impact all of UCLA, every member of UCLA. That includes every employee, every graduate professional and undergraduate student, UCLA Health. So every area of the institution is impacted by the changes and the policy that we're going to be sharing with you today. So it's really exciting to be here with Staff Assembly to think specifically about how this impacts staff. We're also going to be sharing to kind of open up, to provide some context for the conversation. It is very important that we provide some definitions for some of the terms. So that if we're saying non-binary and you don't know what that word means, it's really important for you to know what that word means, how we define it, how the policy defines that word, so we're on the same page with language as we talk about today's policy. So we'll go over some brief terms, then we'll talk about some of the background, what led to this policy change, what has been happening over the past few years that have led to some of the implementation that Kelly and I and the larger committee are working on. Then we'll go into more specifics. We'll talk about the UC policy, then we'll zoom in and look at our campus at UCLA and what are the specific changes and exciting progress that we've been making here on our campus specifically. At the very end, we'll kind of sum it up and share with you ultimately, what does the policy changes that we're referring to today, what do they require of us and the institution of UCLA at the baseline? What is the requirement? We'll provide some resources throughout, some opportunities for you to learn more. We do have a bunch of QR codes built into the session, so make sure you have your phone or device ready so you can follow up and learn more information about some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. And as I said at the very end, we'll open up for Q&A. We've also incorporated some additional considerations for your work as staff, as you're planning programs, as you're processing things. Depending on your role, it might look very different, but some additional considerations to think about as a staff member at UCLA to help support some of the work that's been ongoing here. So when we kind of think about this policy, I've referenced a few different communities in a moment ago. I mentioned transgender folks, I mentioned non-binary folks. Paula mentioned diversity, equity, inclusion efforts here at UCLA. So when we think about what it means to be a transgender or non-binary Bruin in this moment in time, it's really important, and it would be remiss of us to not mention and name the many hundreds, in fact, this number is higher now, the hundreds of anti-LGBTQ bills that have been put forth across states across this country, actually over 500 at this point. Over 230 of them are specifically targeting transgender and non-binary individuals, and many of them youth. So this has an impact on our employees. Of course, it also has an impact on our students. And unfortunately, what we know is that transgender folks in general are at heightened experiences of violence, and unfortunately, even homicide. And so when we look at, for example, every November, there's a day, November 20th, where as a community we come together and we recognize, remember, and mourn the lives of those who have unfortunately passed away due to transphobic violence. And when we look at this data, we know, unfortunately, that every year becomes the deadliest year to be transgender in the United States and in the world. And so this is from 2021. Unfortunately, this number continues to grow. So when we think about the great need to ensure that our university, that our campus is a space that folks can feel safe, being themselves, can feel included, and have access to the resources and support that they need is absolutely critical. Furthermore, what we know from our colleagues here at UCLA School of Law is that when you think about transgender students and non-binary students within the higher ed context, unfortunately, we know that over 50% of transgender students say that their mental health was not good when they were in a higher ed program. This data comes out of the Williams Institute just from 2022. We also know that about 1/4 of transgender people say that adverse lifetime treatment at school has negatively impacted their academic endeavors or their academic success. More than 1/3 of transgender people, unfortunately, have experienced great deals of harm like bullying, harassment, or assault when they were enrolled in a higher education program. This is not K through 12, folks. This is in reference to folks enrolled in a higher ed program. And when we think about our campus, we have fortunately begun capturing specific data on our students' identities, on our employees' identities. And so our campus has been collecting gender identity information since 2016. And so we're now at a position in which we can actually start looking at this data and seeing how big our populations are. And so this is specifically referring to students, does not reflect staff. Although as staff members, as employees, you can right now indicate your gender identity, a live name, which may be different than the name that is on your government issued ID, and actually your sexual orientation in UC Path. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, but this is data to suggest and share with us the number of UCLA's graduate and undergraduate students who specifically and explicitly identified as either genderqueer, non-binary, or transgender men or women with the university at the point of admission when they went to apply for campus, to join our campus. And so you can see here about 1.6% of our population at UCLA identifies within one of these communities that are on the screen here. What we also know, though, is that this number is definitely underreported. That could be because of a large range of reasons. It could be because somebody doesn't feel comfortable disclosing. Somebody may not find out until a year into the program that they are exploring their gender in a new way. Folks may identify, for example, as men or male or female and not indicate on their admissions application that they're trans. So you can see there's a multitude of different reasons and ways why somebody may not indicate that they're transgender with the university or non-binary or some of these other identities. We may have folks, for example, who identify as two-spirit and their identity is not captured here. So all that is to say, we have a significant population on our campus, and we know that even that which has been reported is severely underreported. So this really matters. This work is about supporting all Bruins ensuring everybody can access an equitable place of employment, an equitable academic institution to thrive as an employee, as a student, so that everybody can be met with success here on our campus. That is what this is about. It also is about supporting everybody. It's not just about supporting transgender people or non-binary people. This is about ways to create more inclusive institutions, a more inclusive workplace environment for all people. And so it's a really exciting time to be at UCLA. It's a really exciting time to be a staff member here and to be engaged in this work to support our students. So let's get into it. What does this look like? So as I said earlier, it's really important that we define terms. If we don't define terms, then you might leave confused, more confused than when you got here. So it's super important that you understand some of the basic terminology as we have today's conversation. And later on in the session, we'll also direct you to some additional educational resources so that if you still have questions about terminology or concepts or the why behind this work, I would really encourage you to check out some of the additional educational offerings that we'll be referencing later on into the session. But just generally, as we think about terminology and we have this conversation, some basic terms that it's very important for us to provide for you. The first one is the term transgender. So transgender is an umbrella term, meaning that many people may identify as transgender and may use other words as well that might be synonyms to the word transgender. But generally speaking, the word transgender describes a person or a community of people whose gender identity differs from expectations based on their sex assigned at birth. That is the most broad definition of the word transgender. So some examples of this might look like someone who is assigned male at birth and who is a woman. Another example could be someone who is assigned female at birth and is a man. So those would be two examples of individuals who may describe themselves as transgender. The word transgender is an adjective. So we would say the transgender community, the transgender person, the transgender man. You wouldn't say transgenders because again, it's an adjective. It's describing a person, it's describing a community. Now we have non-binary. And so this is another term that's very important for us to be mindful of and aware of what this means. And so non-binary describes a specific gender identity. And so this is another umbrella term. So again, you may meet two different people who use the word non-binary, and they may mean it in a little bit of a different way. So we're providing a broad definition to cover a lot of different ways that people describe and define this word. But essentially, non-binary is an umbrella term for folks whose gender is neither a man or a woman, okay? So somebody who falls outside of the binary of woman or man when it comes to gender. And again, because this word is so broad, you may meet people that use this term and may define it for themselves a little bit differently. For example, you might meet someone who says, I identify as non-binary, and for me, that means I don't identify as either a woman nor a man. You may meet somebody else who identifies as non-binary and says, I fall outside of that construct altogether. Okay, so at its most broad base, non-binary means somebody who does not identify as a woman or a man. Some people who identify as non-binary also identify as transgender because many of them do not identify with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So a lot of non-binary people also identify as transgender. Not all transgender people identify as non-binary. In fact, many transgender people identify as men or women because that's what they are. They just have this specific, unique experience with their sex that they were assigned at birth. Okay, so those are some basic terms around gender, transgender, non-binary. I will also say some of the policies that we're speaking about actually provide definitions for some of these terms as well. Next, we're going to talk about names. So we just covered gender, just terminology in terms of communities that we're speaking about, communities that are going to be greatly impacted by the policies we're speaking about, colleagues, right? Some of you may identify within the community. Some of your colleagues may do identify in these ways. Now let's talk about names because the policy specifically talks about names explicitly and the expectations that the UC system as a whole and also UCLA has in relation to the capturing and collection and display of names. And so we have our legal names, which essentially is just the name that is on your government issued ID. That is all that is. It's the name that's on your documentation that is on your government issued ID. That's what we're calling a legal name in this context. But we know that many people do not go by the name that's on their government issued ID. Many of us have nicknames, whether you be transgender or not, right? So many of us have other names that we use. They might be nicknames. Some folks may have gotten married and not updated their documentation. There could be a variety of reasons why somebody does not go by the name that may be issued on somebody's individual ID. And so we have another term to kind of define as well is a dead name. And what a dead name is it refers to the name that a transgender or non-binary person was given at birth, but no longer uses. And the term dead name really illustrates how much this is uncomfortable and inappropriate to use this name in reference to somebody who now goes by a different name. So for a lot of trans folks and a lot of non-binary folks, they don't want to have their old name, their dead name coming up in university systems, showing up on displays, because in some cases it inadvertently outs them. And in others, it's just an uncomfortable and sometimes can be really distressing for folks to see their dead name in university systems. And so it's intended, the term is intended to stress the inappropriateness of referring to somebody's name given at birth instead of their live name. And so if you look in the actual UC policy we're referring to today, the UC presidential policy, you'll notice that it specifically defines both dead name as well as legal name. And so legal name rather than the dead name, that's what we're going to be talking a little bit about today. So dead name is a name you don't want to use for an individual if you know their live name. And that's where we get into live name. So we have our legal name, right? In some cases, some people may refer to their legal name as their dead name. Then we have our live name. Our live name is the name that we have chosen for ourselves. It's a chosen name. Some people actually use a live name for professional purposes. Let's say if you're, a woman or somebody who has gotten married and you had on the academic side of the house and you published a bunch of papers in your name, your maiden name before you got married, and now you have all these papers published in your former name, your maiden name. And so for some folks, they may want to retain a live name for their professional purposes, for career purposes. And so this also becomes important sometimes for these communities as well. So what this means is a live name is essentially a chosen name that an individual, an employee, a student chooses for themselves and wants that information, that their name, to show up as a live name, even though it may not be the same name that's listed on their government issued ID. This live name can be a first name, it could be a middle name, it could be a last name, it could be all three. Okay, so generally it's mostly first names, but it could certainly be middle names and last names. Okay, so live name, you're going to see in the policy and our conversation today a lot about making sure that we are displaying and using and providing the option for individuals to disclose with the university a live name that may not be the same thing as their legal name. Okay, so that's some terminology, that's some language. So let's get into the background of these policy changes and how this stuff came to be, because this background is super important. As employees of the UC, as employees of the state of California, there's some interesting changes that have happened here in the state of California that have led us to this moment in time. So what did that look like? In fact, a few years ago, in 2019, actually, there was a new bill called Senate Bill 179. And this bill created the non-binary gender category in the state of California on government issued IDs. This means that if you go down the streets to the DMV and update or renew your state paperwork, that could be your birth certificate, it could be your driver's license or state resident ID, you have the option to indicate your gender as non-binary if you choose to. Okay, so this created that category in the state of California. Keep in mind that over 20 states and the District of California all have a similar law. And so if you're non-binary, you can actually indicate that you're non-binary in almost half the country at this point. Also on our federal passports in the United States. So if you are a passport holder here in the US, you can also update your federal passport to indicate that you are non-binary in the USA, okay? So this is something that's an important change and a significant moment of representation and visibility for many of our community members, in fact, across the country. So you may be a new employee, you may be onboarding a new employee who identifies as non-binary, and their government issued ID today will indicate that they are non-binary. And so on some of these documents, it would indicate that by an X as the gender marker. So as I said, here in California, we had this state law that created the third gender category here in California. There was also an update to some state California regulatory laws, which I'll define in a moment. So this kind of background of these changes to state of California then really cascaded down, and all employers in the state of California are now having to figure out how do we ensure compliance with this law? Meaning, how are we ensuring that non-binary people are represented and that their gender is accurately represented when we're doing data collection on gender? So let's talk about this. So I talked a little bit about the California Senate Bill 179. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Code of Regulations. So this comes from the California Fair Housing and Employment Act. So this is very important as employees of the UC, but also if you're an employer, if you're a manager, if you're a supervisor, or if you ever intend to be. It's very important for us to be mindful of this. So the Fair Housing and Employment Act is essentially the regulatory body that says what is permissible within California employers, okay? And so this was actually updated in 2017 to specifically mention transgender people as protected people in the state of California. It specifically updated the section on sex discrimination to specifically protect employees' gender, their lived name, their pronouns, and their gender expression, meaning the attire, grooming, the way that they're showing up physically at the workplace, to ensure that transgender people can be explicitly protected in the state of California, okay? So that means that if you are not using, for example, the live name for a transgender employee repeatedly over time, that makes you liable for the the Fair Housing and Employment Act, okay? It makes UCLA and you as an employer liable under the act. It's also true if you don't respect somebody's pronouns repeatedly. Our Title IX policy at UCLA also includes pronoun usage as protected, transgender people as protected. So these are really important things for you to consider in terms of just basic protections and how you ensure as an employer and potentially a manager can provide support to your employees as well. So then, as I mentioned, there are changes to state law, like this California bill that allows non-binary people to indicate that on their paperwork, as well as the federal change to the federal law, which we've talked about. So all this is background for our policy change here at the UC. So from the law, we then went to UC policy. And in November of 2020, UC President Michael Drake put out a statement announcing a new policy to ensure that the UC system, all of the UC system, is in compliance with the California state law, meaning that we are ensuring that we can collect accurate gender identity information of all of our community members and that we're not missing out on significant populations of our campus as we're doing our work. So let's talk about the UC presidential policy. This is what really predates, is the precursor to all the work that's happening here at UCLA. So this presidential policy, and if you want to read the policy yourself, feel free to go onto this QR code. But essentially what it does is it ensures that everybody in the university throughout all of the UC can be identified by their accurate gender identity, their live name on all university issued documents and information systems. It also provides guidance on the collection and reporting of gender identity, live name, and sexual orientation. Some of these documents, as it says, university issued documents, that means that individuals who are graduating can get their diploma to read their live name. Their academic transcripts, their transcripts will also be able to have their live name on it. So this is a really big policy change for many folks. So what does the policy absolutely require? It requires that there are at least 3 gender options throughout all UC systems that are collecting information on gender. Every UC system, okay? UCLA Health, for our affiliates at UCLA Health, for graduate student, for employees, everybody, for faculty. An efficient process to retroactively amend gender and names. So let's say you're an alum coming back from the class of 2012, you can make sure that there is a process in place. There needs to be a process in place for that individual to update their name and their gender with the university. Some other highlights, as I said, it permits the use of live names on eligible academic documents, including diplomas and transcripts. And that policy specifically states legal name, if different than live name, must be kept confidential and will have restricted access. So part of this policy is saying not everybody across the UC system is just going to be able to have blanket access to everybody's legal name. No, we want to make sure the university is being really mindful of privacy, confidentiality, and we're only sharing legal name when there is some type of financial, legal, business purpose for that information to be provided. So it's restricting the access to this category of information. Now keep in mind, most people, their legal name is the same as their live name. It's the same thing. Most people do not go by a different name than what's on their government issued ID. If that's the case for you, what will happen is your legal name will default to your live name. So there won't be any change on your end if that's the situation that you're in, just so you know. It's not really going to impact most people in the UC, but for those for whom this is really important, it's going to have a hugely significant impact. So that was what the UC policy says. I just shared with you exactly what the UC policy says. What are the expectations of the policy? What does this mean on our campus? So when this policy came out in 2020, all the 10 campuses said, okay, the state law stuff happens, the UC policy came out, that's from the president's office. We need to make sure that we are responsive and meeting the compliance of the law and the UC policy. So on our campus, we were charged, our EVCP through the chancellor was charged with developing a task force to come up with a set of recommendations for our university to come into compliance with the law. And so that is what happens. Several years ago, the initial task force was launched and began drafting, meeting meeting with stakeholders, had presentations and meetings with transgender and non-binary community members from across UCLA. We're tasked with coming up a list of recommendations, and then the recommendations were positioned, were submitted, and the report was shared with the former EBCP and was approved. So I'll share with you highlights of what the initial task force recommendations were, and then we'll get you up to speed on where the implementation rests today. So this is from the original task force recommendations. On our campus, our work has been separated into 3 different categories. We have data systems, which is primarily what the UC policy speaks about, facilities, and then we have education and outreach. And it's important to note here at UCLA, and I'm proud to say this, that here at UCLA, we really looked at the policy, we looked at the law, and we said we want to make sure we're meeting the compliance with the letter of the law, but we also want to make sure that we're creating a university that can speak to the spirit of the law. So if we're recognizing non-binary people at our institution and we're saying we validate you, we know that you're here, we affirm you, we want to represent you in our university systems, how do we ensure that non-binary people can use a restroom, for example, that's nearest their office, their workplace, their classrooms, right? So facilities becomes really pertinent and important here. Education and outreach. As I said at the top of the hour, if we're putting out all this information and we're ensuring that folks can indicate they're non-binary, can indicate a live name, we also need to do our due diligence to ensure that people know, what does live name mean? Why is this important? How can we support our non-binary colleagues, our transgender students, our intersex employees, right? So all these things come into the mix. So here at UCLA, we had 3 different areas. The data systems really spoke specifically to what the UC policy spoke about. So it talks about collecting live name. On our campus, we also made the decision to allow for pronouns to be voluntarily collected throughout university systems. So this will also be something that you'll see roll out, but that field will be available to employees and to students and university affiliates to indicate with the university what pronouns they go by. Again, that won't be required, but it'll be an option where it was not before. And as I said, the gender options will reflect that of the policy. Another thing to note from the UC policy, for the sexual orientation options, because they also included some instructions and guidance for sexual orientation, they actually added asexual to the sexuality options for the first time ever. So that's really great. We're going to be able to have some good data on how many asexual people are here within the university. So general estimates in terms of national research are about 1% of the population that we know or we can estimate is asexual. So it'll be really great to be able to track that within our system. So then we'll go into facilities, and ABC Schmader in a few moments is going to provide for you a comprehensive update on some incredible work that's been done in facilities. I am so proud to be able to work with ABC Schmader and the subcommittees of facilities for the past few years. They've done such a phenomenal job of ensuring that our campus really meets the spirit of this law. And so in this area, some of these suggestions were to help update our university map that's listed on the website. So Kelly will speak more about these. To make it easier to convert restrooms across campus. So again, we have more restrooms available for more people. And then we had this broad goal of creating an all-gender restroom, a multi-stall, all-gender restroom in every building on campus. That's our broad visionary goal. And Kelly will speak a little bit more about what that means and what that looks like in a few moments. Lastly, education and outreach. So this were the task force recommendations here to provide updates to the campus community. In fact, that's part of the reason why we're here on the staff assembly conversation today, to share with you about what's going on. We want to make sure that as we move, especially closer to some of the deadlines for this policy, that you all know what is expected of you and know about some of the great work that's been happening on our campus. Training opportunities, providing those, and also to consider how we might engage faculty and the academic senate. So when we think about this, we are an academic institution, we're an academic enterprise. So when we think about transgender people, non-binary people, and you have professors who are teaching biology and other types of coursework, how do we ensure that our communities are represented and reflected also in the academic side of the house? So there was a recommendation made for that. So this was from the original task force recommendations. You can see this original report at this QR code here. And so after that committee task force published its report and it was approved, there was a new committee on our campus that was put together to implement the task force recommendations. And that's where Kelly and I became co-chairs of this committee, and have been doing this work for over a year now to work on the implementation pieces. And we again split our committee work into 3 subcommittees: data systems, education and outreach, and facilities. You can see the leaders of those subcommittees. You'll see ABC Schmader is also the co-lead for facilities, so has been very engaged and an incredible leader on our campus in this area. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what progress has been made in each of these 3 areas, and then end with what progress is still coming forth as we move closer to the deadlines for these policies. So we'll first begin with data systems. So on our campus, we're saying only live name is going to be collected, okay, just like the policy states. As I said, we're going to allow the voluntary collection and ability to update pronouns. We're going to update our sexuality options to include asexual, providing at least 3 options for gender. And in fact, on our campus, there's going to be more than just 3 options for folks to indicate gender. The UC policy actually provides 2 different sets of gender identity options that our campuses can use. And our campus chose to opt into the longer set of gender options. Every option also provides the opportunity for an individual to individually indicate and type in their own gender identity. So it's pretty expansive and very inclusive. As I said, a process to amend records. Here are the compliance deadlines. So these are the compliance deadlines that all of the UC is working on. So this is not just UCLA, as I said, this work is happening on every UC campus. And so you can see that the timeline for student data or non-UC path data. So all student systems, the expected compliance deadline for that is December 31st of this year. And then for UC path data, which is what we're going to be mostly impacted by as employees, their deadline is June of 2024. With UC path data, their testing abilities took a little bit longer than expected. And so we're hoping that we allowed a little bit more time for that system to be in place. And on our campus, some of the data has already been tested as of June. So we may find that, and you may find that your information, live name and stuff is populating well in advance of the 2024 deadline. But these are the deadlines for the data systems. And if you want to check out that QR code, you can see a document that our data systems subcommittee put together that gets very granular and specific about what we refer to as the principles. So if you're wondering what pronoun options are going to be available or what gender identity options are going to be available, go to that QR code and it's going to give you a very comprehensive view of what our subcommittee has recommended for those options and what we're implementing. So that's our data systems. I'm now going to turn it over to Kelly, who's going to talk about our facilities options and progress.
Good afternoon, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today. Facilities is such a big part of this initiative that it made sense to have somebody at my level participate in this task force, and I'm happy to do it. And we have made a lot of great progress, as Andy mentioned. The first thing that we did was based on some concerns, accurate concerns, that our powerful interactive map was not accurate. And so we physically inventoried all of the gender inclusive restrooms and gender inclusive facilities on campus to make sure that they were accurate and the map was updated. We found things like things that were listed on the map that truly weren't gender inclusive at all. We found things that were gender inclusive that were not listed on the map. We found restrooms that were locked, designated as staff only or faculty only, which really is a violation of the building code, unfortunately. And so we corrected all that and made sure that that was all accurate. And then there was some concerns about accessibility on the Hill where our students live. That was a lot of progress made with the leadership of Housing and Hospitality Services. Once these concerns were brought to the attention of the leadership up there, they were quickly rectified, and public gender inclusive restroom facilities in various dorms were made available to the entire community, regardless of whether they lived in that dorm or not. And prior to this, that had not been the case. Of course, we had to put a budget together in order to support the recommendation that a multi-stall gender inclusive restroom be placed in every campus building. So if you're wondering, we have currently something like 341 gender inclusive restrooms on campus. The preponderance of those, almost all of them, are single stall restrooms that were converted to gender inclusive restrooms back when the directive from the Office of the President was issued in 2015. But the effort to make a gender inclusive restroom that is multi-stall is what we're really talking about here, and this is what we're really moving out on. And then, so where we are right now, as the last bullet indicates, is we're really focusing to try to get these first multi-stall gender inclusive restrooms in the buildings that have the largest number of general assignment classrooms. Today, we have on campus a total of 4 gender inclusive restrooms that are multi-stall. They're located in the law building where the first one was put in. They're located in Kaplan, Brodart and the Knutson building. We have one going under construction this month in the SAC building, not far from the LGBT Center. And that should be completed before about the middle of October, I would say. And then currently we are looking at doing conversions in math sciences, in Bolter Hall, in Bunch Hall. Those three are the three buildings with by far the most general assignment classrooms in there, and then on to Haynes Hall and Public Affairs. So that's where we are with the conversions of existing gender-specific multi-stall restrooms into multi-stall gender-inclusive restrooms.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kelly. Some really incredible work on our campus. It's really the amount of information about the California Building Plumbing Code that I had to learn in the past couple of years has been incredible. And so I know it seems like it would be an easy task, but in fact, it's quite comprehensive. It's quite expensive sometimes. And I think, AVC Schmader's leadership in this area and the subcommittee's work to ensure that this happens has been an incredible highlight of the work that we've been doing.
I should probably say something about that, Andy. A couple slides ago, under the facilities column, it said something about make it easier to convert restrooms. What made it so difficult was the California Plumbing Code, which basically, if we converted any restroom to a gender inclusive restroom, by the plumbing code looked at the fixtures inside those restrooms as being neither male nor female, and they essentially disappeared, which is really silly since they're really available to everyone at that point. And so we worked hard with the Office of the President. We got that turned around, and that's really what made this easier. And the other big achievement I think that we've had is, I do have a little bit of influence with the facilities directors at all campuses in the Office of the President, and we advocated strongly that that we not be required to make floor-to-ceiling partitions in these multi-stall restrooms, because when you do so, it really increases the cost. When you make these floor-to-ceiling or install these floor-to-ceiling partitions, it requires now that each of them have their own exhaust, each of them have their own lighting, in some cases fire strobes. It's just very cost prohibitive. And working with my colleagues around the other UC campuses and the Office of the President, we got the university direction that it is okay for a campus to choose to use the existing partitions in these restrooms, and that's what we've done at UCLA.
It's absolutely incredible. I mean, I regularly would have people reach out with concern because before this work was ongoing, I mean, literally there could be a 20-minute walk between where you are in your office as an employee or a student to where the restroom is. And so that creates such an undue burden on folks who need to use a gender inclusive restroom. Furthermore, I think it's important to note that this project is not converting every gendered restroom on campus. It's simply creating a multi-stall all gender restroom available to everybody on campus. It's not getting rid of or not creating gendered restrooms for those who prefer to use those restrooms. It's rather creating more restrooms that are accessible to more people. And so it's such a huge, amazing highlight from this committee work that I know I'm really proud of, and that is going to impact so many people. So up next here is our education, outreach, and training. So what's happened in this area, which has been also really incredible. So our committee works very collaboratively with the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion to help support them in their development of an online educational module that's through the UCLA EDI website, through their series. It's through the learning management system, but it's featured on the Office of EDI website. And it's a really fantastic module. So I would say if you have more questions, if you want to learn more, if you have a team that you think needs to be more educated on these topics, I would strongly encourage you to check out this module. Again, it's on the learning management system. I'll pull up the QR code in a moment. Would strongly encourage you and your staff to take this training. It's actually paired with 2 trainings, and one is on preventing discrimination. And so it's really 2 fantastic resources that are available to all UCLA employees right now. And so I would highly recommend that you all check that out. We also have worked with the Chancellor's Office. You may have noticed there's been 3 Bruin posts that have gone out in the past couple of years that have spoken specifically about our progress around these issues. So that's been great. We're also working with the Chancellor's Office to also prepare for some more campus-wide communications similar to these presentations, but more online, on email and social media, to ensure that our students, that our employees, that folks know what's going on our campus related to this. This subcommittee has also developed a gender inclusive classroom guide to support faculty's work. So faculty who may really want to take this as an opportunity to review their curriculum, to ensure that the work that they're doing is gender inclusive, is thinking about all Bruins, this guide will help those faculty members to support those efforts. And part of that too is there's a group of faculty, a small group of faculty who also really want to be a pilot and a champion on these concerns and issues. And so that group has also helped supporting on the academic side of the house. So this QR code will take you to the link where you can access both of those Office of EDI online training modules, one that's on preventing discrimination, and the second one is specifically about this work. So again, if you're curious to learn more, I would strongly suggest you take that training online. It's really, really fantastic, very dynamic, and really provides a lot of up-to-date information on everything we're talking about on this call. So what does this mean? Where do things stand? Where are things right now? So right now, our campus is preparing all of their data systems to make this transition over. So one of the things that the policy specifically talks about is to stop the collection of sex or sex assigned at birth, and rather collect individuals' gender identity, the gender identity that they know themselves to be, with these options provided here. And so that is going to be rolling out. As I said, the collection of lived names as the default option for folks to be showing up on displays, and then restricted access to legal names. So there are going to be very, very, very few departments and areas on campus that will still need access to legal names. And that is for things like financial aid, legally binding documentation that requires legal names, but those offices are very few and far and in between. And if you're curious about what those areas are, you can take a look at that principles document that I mentioned earlier on in the call. Then again, encouraging the collection of pronouns. And so that's another area that will be available as a voluntary optional field. What else can you do as an employer, as an employee, excuse me, as somebody within the UCLA campus? You can work, of course, with facilities to make sure that your signage is accurate, to request perhaps some examination of an all-gender multi-stall restroom. So that could be something you'd want to explore if that's not already in your building. Make sure that that kind of gets on the AVC Schmader's list of buildings to consider. And then also take those trainings. So we have the training I mentioned a moment ago, which again, I strongly suggest you take. It's online. It's about an hour, that training. We as a center also put on a series of trainings throughout the course of the year, and we're offering one coming up on August 25th. That's going to be on LGBTQ+ allyship. We're going to be talking about some of this stuff a bit, but again, if you have questions about some of the terms, I would definitely direct you to take a look at that training. We also provide, usually in November, and then again in March, we also offer a specific training module that is on supporting transgender and non-binary folks. So if you go on our website, if you follow us on social media, you'll get more information about those upcoming trainings as well. But this one's coming up in about 2 weeks, and so I would also encourage you to check that out. Lastly, just some considerations as we come to a close, as you're thinking about your work and other things you might want to consider in terms of creating a more inclusive campus for transgender and non-binary folks. Some other things to kind of consider. We talked about system changes. Each department on our campus, many of them have their own systems. So if you are managing a system or collecting data or collecting a form or something, making sure that that form and that data collection is in compliance with this policy is going to be, first of all, critical to the compliance, but also just helpful for you to see. So again, explore those resources that we shared here in the presentation so you can make sure that the gender fields that you're offering are in compliance with policy, et cetera. Then if you are somebody on campus who is planning events or hosting events, think about restroom access. We have some really incredible resources now with all of these all-gender restrooms that are rolling out and have already been on our campus, particularly the single stall ones. Make sure that the event that you're hosting, the location that you're hosting an event in, the meeting you're hosting people in, has an all-gender or gender-inclusive restroom nearby. And so go to that map on the UCLA's website, so that you can make sure that where you're hosting an event or you're hosting a gathering, that everybody can use the restroom in that space. Lastly, other things to consider as we think about this policy, you're working with different folks. So you might be engaging with students, donors, alumni, other constituents, just thinking about your general communications. So that piece around pronouns is going to be really important. I like to share my pronouns when I begin, and I'll say, my name is Andy. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'll indicate it on my slides, on my Zoom name, etc. Sharing your own pronouns creates an environment that allows for other people, gives other people the permission to share their own pronouns. And so that's a great practice in the spaces, meetings that you're leading, conversations you're having, programs you're planning, and it's something to kind of keep in mind. Also consider the ways in which you speak in relation to addressing large groups of people. So instead of saying ladies and gentlemen, men and women, right, things like that, you want to think about what other ways can you engage and speak to a larger group of crowd. And I'll share some examples of that in a moment. Similarly, the use of titles. So thinking about addressing folks like Mr. and Mrs. and Miss. Sometimes we can just address folks, and one of the ways that we've been doing this quite effectively is just addressing people by their full name. Dear Andy Cafino, right? It still provides the formality without assuming that I know what would be the salutation or honorific that that individual might use. So, as I said, in terms of pronouns, the use of pronouns is a form of respect and it's an expectation. System changes will allow you to be able to indicate and share your pronouns to others. So you want to be mindful that field is going to be available. So pay attention to that. If you're hosting something and pronouns are pulled, that's really important for you to pay attention to. It also allows the compliance for not only this act, but as I said earlier, our Title IX policies. If you're persistently misusing an individual's pronoun consistently, that can be considered workplace discrimination. So it's really important that we get this right and we provide opportunities for us to get it right by using these systems. So some considerations again for formal titles. Many of us are familiar with these more traditionally gendered salutations. It's also important to note that there's another option, a more gender inclusive option that many people are using now called MX or Mixter, mix, pronounced mix. And so if you are collecting salutations, I would always veer on the side of allowing your constituent to indicate to you what they use. And so if there's a possibility or an option, if you're creating a form or you're creating a database or something, asking the person filling out the form to share with you what is their salutation is going to be the best way to ensure that you are being responsive to the way that individual identifies, and you're not assuming that you know what that is. And then, as I said earlier, you can always address people by their full name to make that form, to maintain that formality, while also making sure you're being mindful of language. And as I said, allowing folks the opportunity to share and disclose that to you is important. Lastly, these are just some alternatives to addressing a large group of a crowd, like ladies and gentlemen. You can say, welcome Bruins, folks, dear friends, colleagues, associates, distinguished guests, all. These are all alternatives to addressing a group of crowd in a more gendered way that I think it's important to consider as you're thinking about the work that you're doing for our campus and our community. So with that, I thank you all so much for your time today. I know Kelly and I are both available to answer a few more questions now that we're coming to a close. And so also, if you have additional concerns or questions, you can certainly reach out to me as well. But I know that Kelly and I are definitely willing to answer some questions as they may have come up in the chat here. Yeah, so feel free to drop any questions there in the Q&A and we'll be sure to answer them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again, Andy and Kelly. And I'm gonna pass it on to my colleague, Desiree. So maybe she has some questions for you.
One person, Laura Schreiber, sorry, is asking, where can we find the map locating the inclusive bathrooms?
Sure, I'll put that in the chat. So if you go to that map in the chat, you can go use the little hamburger feature on the left-hand side to specifically look for gender inclusive restrooms, as well as a bunch of other really great features, but that's where you can find it.
Yeah, if you just go to ucla.edu or ucla.com, go all the way to the bottom of the page. It has the campus interactive map link down there. So it's fairly easy to find.
Another individual is asking, is there any outlook on how gender neutral facilities updates will be handled regarding locker rooms?
There is a lot of specific guidance in locker rooms for new construction. So that is clear that in any new construction, there will be locker rooms that are gender inclusive. The modifications of existing locker rooms is something we're still working on, to be honest with you.
I think we have time for one or two more questions.
That appears to be it.
If I could address the question about UCLA Health, I'm not aware of anybody at UCLA Health that has been engaged in this. In the work that I've been doing, because I have relationships with a lot of the folks in the health system, and we are responsible for the maintenance in the Reagan Hospital, they've been engaged. They know this is going on. So If anybody has any concerns about any of the health system facilities, you can reach out to me and I'll get it to the right people. I'm connected very closely to their facilities people.
Yeah, and I would say if it's data systems related or education related, Susie Takuchi is on the data systems subcommittee, so she's also available for things non-facilities related as well.
Is there a plan to include gender inclusive restrooms in all buildings, even if they're not public?
You know, I don't know about that. I mean, we are definitely pursuing the public buildings first. And when you say not public, I'm trying to think what an example that would be. Maybe it would be perhaps an athletic building, for example. I don't know. But I'm nothing comes to mind when I think about what is a non-public building. I think all of our buildings are.
I have another question if we have time. What are the expectations and how will UCLA manage compliance in leased facilities?
That's a good question.
I mean, I can speak to less to the facility side, but it's connected to leasing and vendors. The policy does say specifically that vendors are also beholden to the UC policy. And that's something that we're working through as a UC, because as you can imagine, there's thousands of vendors in the UC. And so I know that that's an ongoing question that's kind of being positioned across the UC. And so in terms of managing lease facilities, that'll be a part of that conversation in relation to vendors is what I would imagine.
If I could go back to the question about non-public facilities, it looks like the examples that were given there as facilities in Strathmore. We, as a matter of fact, have a gender inclusive facility already in the FM building. And yes, we would include Strathmore. To me, those are public facilities and are as appropriate for gender inclusive restrooms as any other.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Again, I want to thank you both for being here today with us and for such an informative presentation. We appreciate people asking their questions. So if you have further questions, please don't hesitate to contact us so we can probably get back to you and respond to your questions. So we are almost at the end of today's webinar. I would like to invite you all to stay connected with the Staff Assembly via social media. So you can find us via Facebook, Instagram, Twitter X, LinkedIn, and of course in our main website. So you can find there a lot more information that is available for you. If you also are interested in volunteering, please sign up. There is a yellow QR code highlighted, so you can if you can afford to take and spend a few hours with us to contribute with the Staff Assembly, we'll be very happy to have you and appreciate it so much. So with that being said, I want to thank everyone again. I hope that everyone who attended here to this Learn at Lunch enjoy it, and that you're taking away something new and informative, important information we have here. Please stay in touch and volunteer if you can, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.